Of us, let's get started, and I think Commissioner Wance and Commissioner Frazier will join us once they're done with, I believe, the comptroller, right?
Yep, they're with the comptroller right now, and he changed his schedule a little in 2 hours back, so we're working with it.
So let's start, and I'm going to be sharing the binder with Commissioner Weaver until I get mine.
Switch name
Hey,
tags.
buddy.
Big easier, yeah.
There you go. Go for it.
All right, good afternoon. So what we have in front of you today is more paper for us to review. Just a quick items for discussion for this meeting is the January 15th notes. I just drafted up notes to help keep us on target and to, help us with our memories about what we discussed at the last meeting. Then we also created a list of follow-up items from the 15th that we've looked into. And then we're gonna pick up with the use table on page 43, which begins with the residential. Hey, good afternoon. So, Roberta, what we have in front of you is just the items for discussion. We prepared a brief set of notes kind of to refresh everyone's memory from what we discussed last time, as well as a list of follow-up items that we're going to go over so we can let you know the status of those. And then we're going to pick up with the new materials on page 43, which is the residential portion of the use table, and then go over next steps.
Are these notes made public?
We have not made them public.
Should these notes be made public?
They can be
As
made
a
public.
synopsis? I mean,
In what way?
If you want to post them on the website.
I think it's a good, you're capturing the comments very well.
Well, they're not official, it's just our general comments, I guess it.
Yeah,
But it's a work session, and it should be, I think, public comment throughout the work session would not
There's no
hurt.
reason not to put them on, they're not minutes.
no, they're not,
No,
No, they're not minutes,
So
just,
that's all I'm.
no, they're just, they're notes, as you state, and just make them available to the public.
Okay.
All right.
So with that, we'll start with the list.
Do you know where it is? Sorry.
That's okay. Is starting with the list of items that we were following up on from the last time. So Mary, with that, I'll let you kind of start off with some of the things that we've looked at and discussed and their status.
Okay, the first thing on there was you had requested that we provide information regarding non-conforming uses, what other jurisdictions do. And I think rather than talking about that today, we'll just point out, we put together a chart, and you've got that in there. It's a comparison of other counties, and it's not all other counties, it's 5 other counties, but the surrounding counties, as well as all the municipalities in Carroll County, and on the different issues, how they handle it, how they handle expansion, how they handle reconstruction, so that you could kind of compare and see where Carroll falls and all that. And we thought, and also what you've got here is the last 10 years, it's front and back of Board of Zoning Appeals cases regarding non-conforming uses. And it shows how, in general, you're looking at 2 to 3 per year. Jay also handles some, so these are the only ones that get to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But that pretty much gives you a idea of the extent of requests for expansion and other issues regarding non-conforming uses. So we thought rather than going through this today, because you'd really have to look at it, we could schedule some separate time to go through that. Also pointing out that in doing the commercial, industrial, and employment campus, the Planning Commission did not consider this as an issue. We were strictly looking at changing those districts. So if you were going to make major changes, this might be something you would want to send back to the Planning Commission for their recommendation, just because it isn't something they discussed at all having to do with it. But, that would definitely be up to you, because it is a zoning code change,
So you're recommending that this goes to the Planning Commission?
No, I think what we're recommending is that, you all review it, and we could
Okay.
take it up at another time, but if you really wanna
Okay.
make comprehensive changes to the way we handle non-conforming uses, and you may not, once you see that we're pretty much in line with the way other counties do it, it's
Yeah.
possible you won't want to, so I think it would be premature to send it to the planning commission.
Okay.
And we could maybe talk about it next time, or I don't know how long we'll be doing work sessions.
You have
So-
enough on your plate as is, right?
Yes.
Well,
Well,
you
also
really
too, when you
have
look at the
nothing.
order of magnitude of what we've had to deal with over the last 10 years, a couple a year, is it
Right.
worth opening up that can of worms, or is our system working well as
Right.
it is? So I think
Sure.
those are some of the things to consider as you go through the materials provided.
Just so it's clear that the non-conforming part of the code is a standalone part within the zoning code. In other words, it's not strictly attached to like the commercial, the
Right.
industrial districts. It is its own part of the code, and it actually applies to any of the districts. The non-conforming can apply to residential districts as well as the commercial industrial and all. So if you wanted to take a look at that, it would be something separate that the planning commission didn't even consider, you know, at the time that they were reviewing it, because they were just looking at the commercial industrial.
Correct. Just the code,
districts.
right, the zoning,
Yep.
how the zoning code portion works, not the other supportive code items.
Okay.
Does that sound like a good game plan? Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay, numbers 2 and 3, you've directed us to change the definitions of light and heavy manufacturing, and we'll be doing that in our, we're kind of keeping a draft going, that when you are all finished, all the changes will be incorporated at one time, and the same with artisan manufacturing. The next issue was golf course, and that really became a discussion of resort. And our concept team met last week, and we talked about resort, and there are some definitions for resort that basically incorporate hotel, meeting space, restaurant. We have that, but at this point, we're not really proposing that it be incorporated here, but that it have some further discussion when we discuss the ag
Ag and
zone.
conservation.
Just because,
It doesn't, we said to add golf course to employment campus.
Right.
Would
or the-
take care of that.
I'm sorry, that's right. Or if you add golf course as a permitted use in the employment campus, you could do all the things that the resort would allow.
Because it was a definition without a place to apply it right now. When you add the sum of the parts, it actually became a resort, and that fit the definition. So instead of just having a definition, all of those things combined became essentially what a resort would be. So the thought process was, instead of creating a new definition that had no place to apply it, maybe wait for the definition if it still makes sense, and the ag and conservation where it could be applied more holistically. Because we do have, when you start adding it up, in an employment campus, if we allow golf courses, you're essentially getting at what a resort then would be.
Because an employment campus can have a conference center, and it can
Have a
have
hotel,
the
yeah.
hotel. and-
Restaurants, all the things that, the definitions that we found basically had in it, so.
And I think that missing piece was that golf course component. So, going back to the use table, that would be the most appropriate place within the commercial and industrial and employment campus districts to apply it, where there is some land. The idea is to have that cohesive type of employment center. So that made the most sense at this point of where we are in the discussion.
Is the only difference between resort and conference center, golf course? As
And
far as-
hotel.
Yeah, a hotel.
So,
Yeah, okay.
it would be those three things. It'd be
So a conference center does not include a hotel?
correct. It's the
golf-
meeting rooms.
And it does not include golf course?
Correct.
Resort includes those two?
But a hotel can have a conference center. But we also allow
Hotel,
standalone conference
yes.
center, I think is what.
Got it, okay.
Are we gonna get tested on this later?
Yeah.
Yes, midterms are coming up soon.
So start studying, yeah. It's a little difficult with these definitions at the moment because we're not looking at the whole zoning code all
Yeah.
at one
Right.
time. Taking it sort of piecemeal, because 90%, if not more, of our golf courses are in the ag and conservation districts, and we're not yet
There.
developing the ag and conservation district zoning, it's a little hard, so maybe a little bit, I guess the suggestion is, and, that we have a little bit more restricted definition at this point, and then as we get to ag and conservation, if the desire is to expand it or change it, that we
Yes.
do so at that point.
You know, we can always go back.
Right,
I
right.
mean, so.
Because we don't, and I'm not, Linda, and all you guys, tell me how this works. If we expanded the definition now, and somebody had it in the ag zone, had whatever it would be, had the elements, or wanted to create the elements in the ag zone for what we would consider a resort, would they be able to do so? Or because we changed the definition? Do you see my question? It's a little tortured.
No, I think because we haven't changed that part of the code yet, and it's, I won't, what do we call it, it's a purpose statement more than a definition,
Okay.
and so I don't think that has any codability to it, so I think we're okay by not
Okay.
doing anything now, or if you did something now, it wouldn't do something to something in the future for the code portion when we get to the conservation and ag.
Right. I just don't want to open a door that we really haven't fully vetted by changing a definition
Right.
that we are thinking applies to these commercial, industrial,
Right.
and employment campus, but somebody, a year from now, before we actually get to ag, tries to apply to the ag zone, and then all of a sudden we've got
Right.
something being, sought in the ag zone, and we didn't, as I say, fully
Right.
vetted or expected, so that, you don't think that?
I don't think so, Tom, Clay J, I don't believe it would.
Okay, just want to make sure, because,
So would you like to add golf course to the employment campus in case there is the possibility for a resort, as we've been discussing it, in the employment campus? Because then you'd have all the components in the employment campus for what is typically a resort.
I guess my question is, why wouldn't we? do
Yeah,
that?
it would actually help with economic development in the future, have that avenue as an option for a developer.
Okay. So then on page 43,
Uh-huh.
the X changes to a P under the golf course description, or the golf course use for employment campus.
It seemed painless.
Yeah. That's a good one, checking off.
Let's make the rest of the session go that way.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure with some of the
Wishful
items coming
thinking.
up. These are
We always
softballs.
wish for that, but
These are the
sometimes it doesn't
softballs.
end up that way.
So, hotel motel.
Okay, hotel motel, we looked at definitions of hotel motel, and even though we all know what we mean by a hotel and a motel, it's really not that easy zoning wise when you try to describe it, because there are exceptions to what's considered a hotel and vice versa. So we would, as a group, you're looking at me, rather not define those in the zoning code, because again, once we do it, and once we say that a motel is accessed from the outside and not from interior corridors or something, there's an exception to that. So if the concern, and Paige, we talked about this on Friday, if the concern is not wanting what's traditionally thought of as a motel in the employment campus, we could put that in the employment campus section itself, say that it would have to at least be 3 stories in height, this hotel/motel, and it would have to be accessed from interior corridors, and that would keep out, if anybody is concerned, what's thought of as a motel. Did that make
Yeah.
sense?
But then wouldn't a motel become a hotel?
Unfortunately, they really are pretty much the
same.
same thing. It's a marketing thing, sometimes it's how much they charge based, there's
But-
really no good.
It's a perception.
It's
I
a
mean,
perception. There's
Yeah,
not-
I see the only difference in the zoning is under the employment campus.
Exactly,
Right.
so if we just allowed economic development to describe what they want in the employment campus, we could put that in the employment campus section and not differentiate it as a use.
You know, we got, 2 pieces to this. One is, we're separating out the definitions of hotel motel in this. So your recommendation is that we combine it hotel/motel?
That's what it is now. We're
Okay.
considering it, we don't define it at all.
Compared to the way
Yes.
it shows.
Yes,
Okay,
so separate it
right.
here, make it the
That's
same.
number
Yes.
one. The second though is, again, the perception. Putting size to a hotel motel of 3 floors or whatever is determined, I still think is, I don't know, I just feel it's limiting. I mean, I think that, you know, a very nice establishment could be one floor.
I
And
think it's market-driven too.
It is.
It is, so,
So-
I mean, being
Right.
flexible in terms of
Right.
if a developer comes into an employment campus and wants to put a motel, as we
Mhm.
perceive it,
Mhm.
if that's his market or her market,
Right.
that's what the market will bear.
And
If they want the highest and best use, they know what that is.
I agree to that. I just get very concerned when we have this attitude, culture, perception of what a quote-unquote motel looks like, and we don't want that in our community. And that's concerning.
Well, this is specifically about the employment campus, correct? So it's
Well-
not elsewhere, it's.
Well, it's two things. One, it's if we combine the definitions of hotel and motel together, and we don't try to separate them, is what you're recommending, then we shouldn't also separate the parameters around a hotel motel in an employment center, and then a hotel motel in other places.
Well, I think that was
Because-
Economic Development's recommendation actually was to make a distinction in the employment campus, so you had a certain look of that
Correct.
campus.
That was the recommendation that
Yeah.
came to this board, that's
Right,
correct.
right. Now, if you disagree, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
everybody's
Right.
clear about what,
Right.
so it's not for the rest of the zones, it would only be for
Employment campus.
employment campus, that they would be recommending a more limited feel and look. But, you know, if the board doesn't want to do that, that's fine, it's just what the recommendation is.
So you have a size requirement?
Not
We
correct.
don't have anything
Nothing.
written yet for this. We were just saying that that could be something that could happen since we're now moving to away from hotel only in employment campus and kind of now broadening the hotel motel definition. And so if the desire is to keep employment campus at a certain level of, you know, attracting higher employment, higher wage type of businesses in there, then the thought would be to have more of a hotel look, and that's something that could be done through the zoning or, you know, covenant restrictions or something on either side.
I just feel like we're dancing around words of prestige and perception and other things, and I think it's unfair. And like you said, I think it's market-driven. So if an employment center that has, you know, a certain level of clientele or employees that are within a certain price range, you want to have a facility that they can stay in, and that facility may be a lower per night type of place. It should be market driven. It shouldn't be 3 floors of this or restrictive, because we shouldn't be prejudiced to that. We should allow the market to drive what the market would drive and just leave it at that.
Be developer driven.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and not, when you get with the plan submitted, I think that will be dealt with at that time.
I mean, Eric, what?
So we're looking at making the zoning under hotel and motel identical, is that our objective?
For all the zones.
I support that. And give the flexibility to the developer, like you
Yeah.
said, it would be market driven. We don't want to tie up their options.
Nor do we want to look at being prejudiced whatsoever, and we're not.
So then for page 42, it would be hotel/motel, and then conditional in the C2, permitted in the C3, and permitted in the employment campus. And then as part of an industrial park, hotel motel
Right,
as part of an industrial park.
right.
And then the same permissions, P and P for I1 and I2, as long as it's part of that industrial park. Okay.
Okay, the next thing on the list was medical cannabis, and we have a lot of information on that from several years ago, but we have not had time to get that into a good discussable format for you yet. So if you give us another week, we can come back next week.
Yeah, that's a real complex issue.
Yes.
State and federal regulations.
And we had a lot when we did it several years ago, but we're looking into what other jurisdictions are doing, what's actually been put on the ground, that type of thing, so we have a little catch-up.
And is there any new legislation on this subject in the General Assembly this year? Does anyone know that would affect this?
Not yet.
As far as distribution, I don't know.
Okay.
Because that's kind of what we're talking about is the commercializing it, making it available in commercial districts for.
I'm just concerned if there is anything in the pipeline in the General Assembly, if that will affect us, and do we need to consider it?
And we'll keep looking, and Mike's pretty good about letting us know what's coming forward. I've heard rumor stuff would be coming forward, but I haven't seen anything.
A lot of stuff seems to be stuck in, they had a technical glitch in Department of Legislative Services, and a lot of bills are stuck in that technical glitch.
Is that a good thing?
If it lasts the next 90 days, maybe, but yeah.
We're all safe.
Yeah.
But at the moment, so there's sort of,
Yeah.
we believe there's this huge backlog of stuff that's about to come out, but it's not out quite yet, so.
And Commissioner Wentz and I will be down there tomorrow at Mako, so we can
You check and
reach out to Mike as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think giving you more time to figure out this, medical cannabis makes sense. I mean, I'd rather not rush into decisions if they're half-baked right now, so. yeah.
And if you just want to make a correction in your book, Clay pointed out to me after the last meeting, there is a mistake in here where we just have the dispensary and all of them in the IG.
On page 42.
On page 42, it's actually also in the IR permitted.
I-1 and I-2.
I'm sorry. Yes, currently the IR to be the I-1.
Right.
So if
So
you.
both are Ps.
Yes, both are Ps, as well as the processing and the growing. And that is what the Board of Commissioners did 3 years ago.
Right.
And that was my mistake, but currently it's in the IR and IG, carried over to the I-1 and the I-2,
But the real question now is, it's
to the commercial.
into the commercial, right?
Right. So
yeah.
that's what we'll be looking into as far as what other jurisdictions are doing.
Thank you.
Do you want to do medical dental?
Yeah. Medical dental. So this was something that Commissioner Wance was interested in, and boy, that was a hard one to tease out, and we're still working on finishing that up. But the map that we have here for you today, one of the questions was with regards to C1 and how much C1 there is in the county, and then where is medical dental currently within C1. So this map represents, the circles are, so you can see because they're such small little areas, but there's 318 C1 properties that have been designated in the county. Most of them are in the rural villages. And again, we talked about those crossroad communities and having the ability to have some limited commercial. Not a lot of those are still not even acting commercial, even though they're zoned commercial. A lot of them are residences still, and they've kind of fluctuated over the years between maybe at one point a general store, now someone's home again, to that extent. And the C1 properties are very, very small. Out of the 318, it's only 208 acres. So most of these are less than an acre. The average lot size is about a half acre, roughly 0.66 acres. And the largest one is 6 acres. And there's about 7 or so that are around the 1 acre mark. Looking at the medical dental, I've gone through pretty much the whole northwestern part of the county with the C1, haven't come across anything. The one we do know of is along 26 near Nels Acres off of Fallon, that complex there. We still left that as C1. In the Freedom Plan, a lot of the C1, a lot of the medical dental actually was in R20,000 and along 26. So that actually we recommended that the land use designation be commercial medium, and so then the zoning would become commercial medium.
C2.
C2, I'm sorry, thank you. So there's not a lot of that in the county. And a lot of it's not like socked in neighborhoods. I know Commissioner Wance was concerned a little bit about that. So we're still kind of looking through the 318 properties, but other than that one, we haven't come across anything else that is medically oriented in C1.
Are you saying that C1 property, all the way on the east side, 26, is going to be recommended to be C2?
No, it's going to stay C1.
It's gonna stay
It
C1.
stays C1 because of where it's located. It's off of. Part of the C2 thought process was it had to be off a major road. And that actually is accessed from Fallon, not from 26. And it really does service, so also what community is it serves? It really services that Nels Acres community for the most part. I mean, yes, people may come from other areas, but the idea was you have this age-restricted community, and then there would be medical services nearby to help support that community. So that was the original intent. And if that community were to ever develop as it's been envisioned to expand, that would again service that greater age-restricted area. But that's really the only one that we can find so far in the county. So I'm going to continue to look through, but so far, like I said, the northwestern portion of the county, the C1 does not have any medical office in it or dental complex.
How many properties would this be added to it for future C1s?
I'm sorry, so
How many would you be adding to this 300?
none. So this is the land use designations
Oh, okay.
that would be turned into zoning. And most of them are already
C1.
BNR that we've made C1. So right now, unless, when we go to do another plan, that would be other things to consider if it makes sense to have more C1 property available.
You have a breakdown of C2s, I mean, the other zoning?
We do, I just don't have it with me,
Yeah.
but
No,
yes,
no,
we do have that.
I appreciate it. This is helpful. So.
Okay, we can bring that for next time,
Yeah.
is just bring you a breakdown of what all the properties
Yeah.
are.
Okay, the last thing on the follow-up list was adult entertainment, and the only one we've identified is the one that was being discussed last week in Finkingsburg.
And that's actually zoned BNR.
But it must be non-conforming.
Mhm.
Best we could tell, the adult entertainment restrictions came into place in 2002. Did I tell you
Mhm.
that too? Either
2001.
2001. So they must have been existing, and they are currently non-conforming, so they would continue with their non-conforming status in their new zone.
The only one we could find that, there was one in Greenmount that was in the county north of Hampstead, but that's no longer in business. So, this is it. That's the only one in the county proper that we could find, not in the municipalities. I didn't come really across anything in the municipalities either, so it's very, very limited.
So the concern, I don't remember, was by making it in the I-2 that we were gonna make somebody non-conforming, is that?
Or
We
why
were being too
restricting it,
restrictive.
why restricted just to I-2? Does it make sense to put it somewhere? Similar to the medical cannabis conversation, is why restricted just to those two? Do we wanna have it somewhere, in the commercial districts as well?
Right now, that one facility in Finksburg is in,
BNR,
So it's non-conforming.
so it's non-conforming. And that center developed in 1987, but I'm not sure when that business, started there, because ESTAT records go to the whole building, not the individual uses in the building. And that particular company does not have a website, they have a Facebook page, so it was really hard to say established when or from when they started, so, fun research.
Now, if that
Sure.
business was, excuse me, if that business was sold, would they lose their conformity and their,
Well,
If
that's
it
what we were
was sold,
talking about.
no, sir. The new owners
It would
could
end.
continue it. As
Oh, they'd
long
be
as
able
the
to-
use continues,
okay,
change of ownership is not an issue.
okay, that's what I was wondering.
is this on 140?
Yes, near radio.
It's near the tall
tower.
700-foot AT&T
Yeah.
tower.
Yeah.
I know
It's
exactly.
right in front of it.
There used to be, and the reason I know this location
In that
is
strip mall.
because there used
Yes.
to be a scuba diving.
Yes.
Right next door
And
to
that's
it.
where I got trained. They're no longer there.
That's pretty eclectic center. I mean, they have a robotics place there, a dentist office. There's a lot of stuff
I just
there.
went in scuba place and out, so. Okay, so that establishment's gonna stay there?
Yep.
It's just gonna be non-conforming,
Which it
Oh,
currently is.
it already is.
which it
Yep.
already is. so.
Yep.
And the conversation we're having was, do we wanna allow these type of facilities in other zoned areas? That,
Yes, as a primary principle.
okay,
They got one chance to get in under the zoning.
in the industrial.
Is this Our current zoning is,
Yes.
is
It's
just for
currently-
industrial
Yes.
general.
Yes.
So you guys can change.
Yeah, we didn't
Concept
agree.
team didn't suggest a change.
Nope.
And there has not been an outcry or outpour of demand.
Not that we've heard
Then
of.
I think it would work. I mean,
Yeah.
unless there's some pressure
Right.
upon us with some developer wanting to put in adult
Yeah.
entertainment, we don't see it.
Yeah.
Right.
So at least you have it in there. If someone comes before us wanting it or comes before zoning, it's there.
Right.
There's no need to expand
Yeah.
it.
And look, if there is some type of change in this particular market, I mean, a text amendment can always come forward at some future time. The other thing I've noticed too, in kind of doing this research, is a lot of them are associated with other types of things in the store. Like this particular one had, a majority was a vape shop and sold tobacco products. So it was more than just that use. It was also smoke, vape, all that sort of stuff.
And we don't have, that is not another category, is it, this vaping?
I think it's under general
That's
retail.
just general
General
retail.
retail.
Okay, 'cause that's new to me,
Mhm.
so, okay. Yeah, I mean, my recommendation, I guess if there's no outcry
Yep.
for it, leave it as is, and I guess, I won't say minimize it, but again, not to be prejudiced about things, but don't.
This is Carroll County.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say there's no demand for a change right at this point in time, so why consider
and I
it?
guess let's keep it that way, yeah.
Well, now we can say we talked about it, so
Exactly.
check that off.
Yep.
And made some considerations. All right, so the only still outstanding issue from this is to come back, then just to circle back around and,
Cannabis.
finish out the medical cannabis, and then, come back with, we can find any other examples of, medical, dental, and the C1. And
Yeah.
then, just part of that general discussion is I'll bring a breakdown of, we have all this prepared, but a map of C1, C2, and C3, I1 and I2, and the distribution of, acreages, and total amounts, like how many parcels, how many acres, that sort of thing.
I think that'll really help
Okay.
visualizing it, you know what I mean?
All right.
Visual, visual.
Y'all put a lot of work into this. Thank you.
You're welcome, we try. Thanks, Mary. Cracking the whip on her.
And then again, making things available on the website, sharing.
Sure. Yep, I have that.
These really help.
Yes, and also the schedule is on our website
Right.
as well, and maybe
Yep.
just to get on your schedules at the end, not to get ahead, but we can assess how our progress is today. We have one more session scheduled next week, and then how many more we should try to schedule for on Tuesday, just to continue to keep
Right.
this rolling.
Right.
Okay. So then I guess beginning with page 43 is the pickup of our new discussion regarding residential. And again, you know, our zoning code, and Jay, Clay, Tom, Mary step in, you know, we had a cascading zoning code where the least intense use was allowed in the more intensive districts. So that's why we have a lot of the proliferation of residences in our commercial, industrial, zoning categories. So that's why you'll see that. Our recommendation, though, is one of the tenets we were trying to do is have these districts that were more focused on what the purpose and intent of the district was one of the main tenets of concept team, meaning that, you know, commercial was commercial. Residential would just be residential, not have those commercial uses infiltrate. But rural village is one of those just anomalies within the county where the idea was, at the origination of zoning, make opportunities available in the rural areas to have some limited commercial to service that rural village, so to speak. So since there are so many residences that we don't want to go and make non-conforming, we would allow residences to be permitted as a primary use in the C1 and C2 within the rural village districts.
And I-1 also, because
And I
we
want,
do
I'm
have
sorry,
some
yep,
I-1.
sorry, there's a lot of I-1 out there as well.
What about a small strip mall in a residential area?
Well, it would already be zoned for that or land used accordingly.
I'm looking in future, maybe developments as far as multi-use or whatever, and they may want to come in with a small convenience store or a couple in an area. How would that play out in?
Would, That's the opposite. So you're talking about residential zoning
Mm-hmm.
and adding a commercial element to it. So when we get to residential zoning,
Well,
that's when you talk about
or
that,
it could
right?
be the other, we had some you couldn't add houses into a commercial
Well,
You can.
Well,
area.
we do.
we, down, Princess Shopping Center?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's mixed use, so you have condominiums on top, or apartments, whatever you wanna call them, on top of a shopping center.
Yeah.
That's,
That would be allowed in the
is that C2,
multifamily.
what is that?
That would be C3.
That's C3.
So,
Should be.
Well, the trick on that one, and
Yeah.
this is Clay's favorite code, that's actually in the subdivision code where that allows for those second-story accessory uses to a shopping center.
It's in the what code?
subdivision.
Chapter 155.
Take it away,
Yep,
Clay.
Clay. That's all yours,
Use
Clay.
small words.
That's Clay's code.
There's a section, planned business centers, which are shopping centers.
Right.
That comes from the development code, and there's a section in the development code that states that allows for residential apartments on the second floor of planned business centers. There's a limitation on the number of units that can be put in there, but there is a provision for allowing that.
Okay. And we wanna keep that. Keep that,
We have not changed
we
that.
haven't changed that, and the intent
Those
is
are
not-
considered accessories, so they're not showing up in this table of uses because they're considered accessory.
The apartments are considered accessories to
The planned business
the
center.
planned business center.
That's right, isn't it, Clay? They're listed as accessory in the or the subdivision code.
The planned business centers, we're changing the definition of them to, or.
Planned commercial centers.
Planned commercial centers. And there's been no
We haven't changed it.
discussion to change that.
I'll take that.
That allows.
You can start the meeting now.
We're almost done. I think we're going to adjourn.
Can I-
All right. Timing is everything.
They made all the right decisions.
Okay. I don't hear that very often.
You can take credit for them all.
Okay, until rudely interrupted, what were you
Yes.
saying?
Yeah, say it again.
There's been no discussion of eliminating that allowance. And in fact, what it says now is that you can do it on new planned business centers, and if there's existing planned business centers, you can
Add on to it,
modify those.
modify 'em.
That's correct.
If I could, I can really read it. I mean,
Sure.
what it says in chapter 155, under the planned business center is, under accessory uses, it says regardless of the underlying zoning district, the planning commission may allow residential uses as an accessory use to the planned business center, as follows. And then they talk about it being second story and the floor area and some other criteria. So it already allows it in 155 to be an accessory use.
Okay.
And we're not proposing to change that at all.
No, and that's
If
kind of
That's
what
what
you
I,
want.
that's what I
Right.
was checking.
Right,
Okay.
that's
Right,
good.
but now, I just want to make sure, Commissioner, we are saying that you can't do a single-family residential house in these commercial districts, but you can do these second-story apartments all with the
I
planning
was just
business center.
clarifying. That's-
Okay.
Okay.
The other place that Planning Commission recommended that residential be allowed is in the employment campus under multifamily dwelling. And this was one of the items that we brought up early in the process when we gave some of our earlier presentations about some of the policy decisions that the board should discuss more in depth with regards to some of these tenants. And one of them was with regards to the employment campus. A lot of the research that we found for employment campuses that are successful, not only in this region but nationally, are ones that have a live-work component, so where there are some type of appropriate housing available to help support or to be a part of an overall employment campus. So we did add that in. And there are some restrictions. I think if we say 15%, no
Yes.
more could be. You could not have any more than 15% of the total area for residential within the employment campus.
So is this like Warfield with the townhomes?
Yes, it could be.
I mean, as an example, it's not
Mhm.
Warfield, 'cause that's not
Mhm.
ours, but,
Mhm.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
And this language was also added, and that's on page 40, strictly applying to only the employment campus. Such residential uses shall be compatible with and supportive of, and they were the planning commission felt strongly it should say compatible with and supportive of the employment uses. They don't just want it to be a separate corner of the employment campus that allows houses. It would be something that would be integral to the whole, plan.
Overall
The
site
whole
plan.
Right.
So that's actually shows up, those permitted uses show up on page 44, the top of 44.
In that second to last column.
Okay.
So it's recommending multifamily, single-family townhouse, and two-family dwellings.
Do you guys want to talk about the age restricted?
Yes, yep, that's the next. So now I'm gonna reverse what was recommended by Planning Commission, because they would recommend this now moving forward, but it was not in the packet because it was a different thought process at the time, was that moving age restricted out of the commercial districts. Currently, we allow 55 and older by, and the density is determined by a formula, and Clay can explain that formula, the per square foot formula, to allow that age restricted 55 and older component in our commercial districts. And when Planning Commission was recommending this and they had all of their discussions, there were more opportunities based on the future land use designations within the Freedom area, because one of the issues, not just in Carroll, but everywhere, is that age restricted isn't your grandparents' retirement community. I mean, they really do act as more of a high density residential type community. People are still working, there's still a lot of car trips, they still have similar service usage. The only thing that's differs is schools. They don't have the impact on schools that a multifamily, traditional, non-age restricted community would have. So a lot of jurisdictions started placing them in high density residential because that's really how they're behaving. But since we don't really have any other opportunities in the county proper, and when I say that I mean not the municipalities, to be able to have age restricted, and we were pulling it out of the commercial, does this body want to add it back in? To the add the age restricted back into the commercial districts?
I got a couple thoughts on this. One is what's being built in the Freedom area on Oklahoma, right, Bennett, with the apartments or condominiums, what are they?
Apartments, basically.
Apartments?
Yeah, age
They're
Age restricted.
age restricted, yeah.
And there's concern that they do not conform to that community, and they're being built there. That's not a commercial area.
No.
That's all residential.
Correct. That was R20, I believe.
Yes.
R20.
And your recommendation that we maintain that allowance across Carroll County?
No, because that's
Or no.
R20. The recommendation here would be to allow it in the commercial district, C2 or C3, I assume you mean.
Well,
Yes.
So you're not gonna allow it in residential? That's my, I'm just.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's allowed in residential, but in the residential high. And since there is no available land in the county currently on water and sewer that is zoned, or has the ability to be zoned residential high, then this future, and we were getting rid of it in the commercial districts, it really limited the ability
Oh,
for
it's
age
cut it
restricted
out.
housing.
Right.
So is what's being built, that's residential high area where it's being built right now?
No, it's an R20.
R20.
So, but you just said that it should only be in residential high, so why is it allowed in?
It's currently
So
So
allowed.
currently we allow it in R20, and we also allow it in our commercial district. We allow it in BG and BNR. So when Planning Commission was reviewing the zoning code, and again, trying to take the residential out of the commercial and the commercial out of the residential too, what made sense, what made sense is that we took out the age restricted from the commercial districts. So given the fact that with the Freedom Plan, there were no more high-density land use designations where there was the ability to put that type of use. And now that there isn't, and we had recommended, or Planning Commission had recommended it not be in the C1, C2, or C3, do you all want to have that discussion to allow it back into the C1, C2, and C3? It's currently
Yes.
allowed now
Yeah,
into the
so-
code.
Especially if there's limited options in the
Correct.
future with their aging population.
There is no other option then, because as you said, there's no high density around the county, because we don't have the water and sewer.
So we
to it.
have to.
So therefore, if you're gonna have it anywhere, right now, it's gonna be C1, C2, C3. Now, if we get additional water and sewer services in other parts of the county, it could be allowed then, but you're looking years and years down. So if we're gonna allow it anytime soon, you'd have to put it in one of or all three of those.
Going back to that one property, was that an exception made to allow that, or
That was allowed at the time.
it was allowed at the time?
When it's
but
allowed
not-
today still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still is.
The residential
Yeah.
Until
zone,
we get
again,
this-
we're not dealing with the residential
I
zone.
understand, but I
Yeah.
just, to clarify,
Yeah.
but that's a medium area.
Mm-hmm.
It's not allowed in medium, it's only allowed in high.
The recommendation so now separating land use from zoning, so the recommendation for the land use and in the Freedom Plan with the land use definitions was to have it only allowed in high, residential,
Right.
and not have it allowed at all in the commercial. And what we're seeing is, so when Planning Commission sent the zoning code package up, it was out of the code as well. The recommendation was to not carry that forward in the code. Now knowing what we know,
Yeah.
do you want to add it back into this code discussion because of the limited ability to build that type of use?
The property in, on 26 all the way on the east by the water,
Correct,
that's
yes.
C1. So we're allowing that, already in C1,
Well, it's allowed in the BNR currently, so, right, correct.
which is C1.
Right.
Well,
That would be a
but-
C2 property, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're already allowing it.
Yes.
We are currently allowing it.
It's currently allowed in BNR, BG, and residential medium and residential high under our current zoning order.
Actually, residential.
Residential.
Even
R40,
residential low,
yeah,
too.
R40
It is
and
now.
up.
So it's pretty allowed pretty well everywhere. The recommendation was to restrict it more to just residential high. And since both the master plan and the Freedom Plan have so little residential high on which you could build an apartment building, basically, because it requires water and sewer, the recommendation is to add it back into the commercials.
Does any of my fellow commissioners see any potential political backlash over expanding into commercial zoning?
Well, it was in there already.
Already,
All
yeah.
we'd be doing is
So
putting it
then
back
we're all right.
into the new plan. I would,
Leave it in.
was allowed in C1 before? Or what, I know there was no C1, but.
BNR, yes,
BNR,
BNR,
okay.
BNR, currently allowed in BNR.
Okay, all right. Because my feeling is we should allow it in C2 and C3. That's my feeling.
I agree.
I do too.
You're getting better every day.
Thank you very, and I keep my vest on despite your advice.
Okay.
Well, why wouldn't we put it in C2 or C3?
I'm saying allow it in.
I know you,
Okay.
no, I
Okay.
understand.
You know, what are the pitfalls
Why,
of
why,
doing it?
why wouldn't we?
I think again, just that we have such limited amount of commercially zoned land that it would be potentially taking commercially zoned land
Okay.
out from its
Right.
highest and best use as
And you-
commercial. And the
Right.
per dollar cost
Right.
of C3 is probably some of your most valuable land, even more so than your industrial in the county. So that's why,
Right. No, I
we may
appreciate
wanna
it,
limit.
because that was the conversation we've been having for the last few weeks. You know, just because you can doesn't mean you should. What you should be looking at is what you're educating me on is what is the best value for that piece of property? And if it's not the best place for it, then, you know, should we limit ourselves and work on finding the best, you know, use of that property and zone it that way?
Is that our decision now, or
mean,
is that
that's
the
kinda what-
property owners?
Well, no, it should be ours. I mean, that's kind of what you've been leading us, you've been leading the path, leading us down this road of what's the best use of property.
This is one of those hybrid situations where I think you have basically a residential use, but it's a commercial operation a lot of times. And so you know, when you say, okay, in the commercial zone, you really don't particularly want residential uses in there because of the conflict and because of the lack of best use. But in this case, this is a residential use that's commercially driven, so to speak. So, you know, going back and forth, where does this fit best? This is why we're having a discussion with you today, because for us it's tough, because it's a purely residential use, so you're going to get those residences who maybe
Like a homeland situation.
exactly who may be in a situation, and you're putting commercial around them, and they're going to say, "Why are you doing that?" Well, because you're in a commercial zone,
Right.
That's correct.
So those situations will happen. They will happen.
Yes,
I'm not
they
going to say
will.
they may. They will happen.
Right.
And so as long as everybody understands it, that's some of the ramifications. First, that you're putting a residential use in a commercial zone. It may not necessarily be the highest and best use. And second, there may be conflicts because you are putting a residential use in a commercial zone. If everybody's okay with that, then, I say you move forward.
Is there a benefit of doing that, though? Is it all negative, or could it be positive?
Benefit is we have a place to put them.
Yeah, right.
There's no place to
And
put
you can
them if we don't
a
have
walkable
this.
community for
Right.
those
Also, you have
people,
walking
yep,
places.
and have transit available for those that
my
are,
next thing
don't
is
have
walkable.
mobility issues. So,
And you will get, I think, probably from the development community, and of course, I don't know specifically that, but you will get probably from them that there is a market for that, putting those types of residential uses in around the commercial use, so there is more, ability for people to interact and patronize those businesses. So I think you'll hear that provides probably flexibility from the development side, the development community to do that also.
No, there's a couple of, really nice models in the state that have that. And, I'm appreciative of that. I'm just not sure if that's the model we want to use here, because Holman could be a big challenge, where it's put in the middle of something. Now we gotta,
Well, I don't want
I
to cut
don't
you off,
know.
but I just think that's a big challenge because the people that moved in there didn't understand that's a little commercial area. If they would have looked, they would have done a little research ahead of time, they would see this is where it is. What'd you expect?
but it comes down
I
to.
mean, I remember,
Yeah.
not to cut you off again, but I will. I remember I was looking at a house over somewhere around here. And when I went and looked at the house before it was built, I was going to have a house built there. And I said, well, what's going to go around it? And the guy said, oh, this is over here. It's nothing's planned. Then I went into the city of Westminster and asked them what their plans were. And they said, well, the next phase of this is going here, and next phase. Okay, I would have been surrounded by all this I wasn't aware of unless I checked it out. So it's kind of like buyer beware. If you move into one of these places, check out what can go around you. And then we won't have the people coming up to us 20 years later and say, well, look at the stormwater running off into my thing. And it's
Well,
just
and-
the way it is.
I do, and I appreciate the due diligence in buying a home and understanding that, but that's also part of the arguments from this Freedom Plan discussion back months ago that I was getting from, well, this was my expectations because this is the way it was zoned and land use, and things are changing. Now, that's one, but two, going back to the original discussion I was trying to have, was you were leading us down the road of the best use of property in the county. And, is there a better use for property of C3 as opposed to just putting these homes up, and limiting it to just C1, C2, and leaving C3 available for other more, I don't know,
Truly commercial.
truly
Yeah.
commercial
Yeah.
or appropriate,
Uses,
use of the land. That's kind of where I'm coming from. So my recommendation would be like a C1, C2, but leave C3 alone for what C3 is designed to be, and not senior citizens homes or senior whatever we're calling it.
age restricted,
Age restricted, so, which I think we're all part of right now.
Yeah, we're all gonna wind up in these senior condos.
I'm looking on this side. So, that's my recommendation, is,
So leaving C3 out of, and maybe I1, I2, and then leaving it
yeah, in C1, C2,
Just C1, C2.
just C1, C2.
What about employment campus, since we're allowing other residential?
The only thing the planning commission thought about that was if it's supposed to be supportive of the employment campus and you're talking retirement community, it's a bit, at odds.
Still work?
They can,
They
They
still
don't
work,
wanna.
and parents will
Yes.
be living there, taking care of the kids.
you certainly could do that, but it just isn't
I think most
really
age
what was
restriction-
envisioned for the
Actually,
residential
just to be
within the employment campus.
clear, I believe age restricted doesn't allow someone under 18 to live there. So,
No, but they're
Oh.
in proximity of somebody living in an employment campus that's working somewhere, and they're taking, they're, you know, it's
oh, I
keeping
see,
the
I
neighbors
see. what you
together.
mean. I see. what
But,
you mean.
So,
Everyone will
yeah,
have to-
I don't see it appropriate for C3, I1 or I2. I think there's better uses for those properties than age-restrictive homes. C1, C2, and EC, I mean, that makes sense.
Okay.
But, I mean, that's my opinion on it.
Is everyone okay with that? Or?
What are the restrictions in C1 for size?
The restrictions for retail and service are 10,000 square feet or less, but the other types of uses don't have that size restriction. They're really restricted by the size of
By
the property and
by
I'm not
setbacks.
sure you. Right, I mean, if you only have half an acre.
There's a square footage. Craig, can you,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you explain the square footage? It's 3,000 square feet per,
How the calculation.
unit
thank you.
per
How the
3,000 square
calculation
feet?
is determined is it reverts back to the R 20,000 zoning district bulk requirements, very similar to a plan we had in front of the planning commission last week. The density for retirement homes is for multifamily units, not to exceed one dwelling unit per 3,000 square feet, which is roughly one dwelling unit, 15 dwelling units per acre. 14 and a half, around that number.
And C2 goes up to what size?
Um,
5?
it's
Some
up,
of them are bigger.
yeah.
Is there a size limit?
But,
No, I mean, typically what happens is, for instance,
get
the one
that
we saw the other
equal
day,
lump them
it'll be,
soon.
it was a 3.5 acre site, and
Right.
theoretically, it could be 55 units in 3 buildings. 3, two-story buildings, or however they could figure that out.
so the size restriction on the building in the C1 would be just the setbacks? You could have one large building?
As long as it doesn't exceed the height requirements.
Yeah,
50
I'm
feet.
not sure we had established
Yeah.
a size requirement in the C1.
No, we
That's
didn't.
correct.
No.
Shouldn't have to.
Would just be the height and the setback.
Mhm.
And as Linda pointed out, a lot of the C1 properties aren't very large itself.
Right.
So by the time you do the, all the code requirements, parking and so forth and so on, they're gonna be limited in size to begin with.
Especially
also
most
with
of them are half acre, as you said, pretty much.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, the one caveat I would say to that is if a lot of them seem to be clustered together, so you could have multiple C1 properties, parcels come together and reparcel and have one property that they would build under. So that is something that could be foreseen in the
Yeah.
future. But again, there's not like these hundreds of acres of swaths of C1 together. I mean, most of them are pretty small, even in combination, you may only be a few acres.
So,
do we think?
everyone okay with C1 and C2? And employment cap?
Yep.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
I'm
Could we
with
go
it.
with employment campus too, or is
Yeah.
that was just C1, C2?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. You did?
Yeah.
C1 and
I
2.
think Commissioner Rothstein was suggesting employment campus as well.
It's another reason not to have it, but.
Again, once again, until we're interrupted, it doesn't, I mean, why not an employment campus? Again, not to show prejudice of ages in employment
Ages,
campuses, I'm just, again, the big concern was the proper use of I-1, 2, and C3. So my recommendation is C1, C2, employment campuses. How many employment campuses do we have in the county?
Well, we have none currently zoned in the county, but, the
All of them.
Delaney, Lashire, south of 97, Bristol, and,
Okay.
So it's half a dozen
yeah,
properties.
there's, in the city,
Right, it's
yeah,
just
give or take, that's what I thought.
4 or 5, yeah,
Okay,
that will be zoned.
correct.
A clarification is, if I could, just to be sure, in the employment campus, what's being proposed says that residential uses shall not collectively comprise more than 50% of the total area of the employment campus. I want to make sure these types of facilities would fall under that criteria.
Right.
In other words, well, I just want to make sure,
Yeah.
because we can have people come in and argue with it, they're part of the commercial part of it, not part.
You said 15%.
15%.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
500 acres,
This would
you
be
have
part of the
15 acres,
15% of the residential use in the commercial
Absolutely.
employment campus,
Mhm.
okay.
Residential is 15% of the
Right,
total
and,
use of the
and,
employment.
and this use would be considered residential in that
Correct.
15%, that's what
Yes. Yes.
I want to make sure we're.
Yeah.
So everyone's okay with those 3 zones?
Yes. So then I think that takes us down to the group living. If everyone is okay that single-family townhouse and 2-family should not be permitted in the commercial or industrial, except for the employment campus, again, as complementary to the employment that is there. And then group living, so now kind of going back to, are they a business or not? And I think Tom eloquently put it, you know, assisted living facility and continuum care and nursing home, those really are commercial enterprises. Even though people live there, they really do act commercially with deliveries and other facilities and caregivers and traffic volumes that could be seen throughout the day, not from necessarily the residents, but employees, visitors, deliveries, things like that. So that's why we felt to continue to keep those in the commercial districts.
And again, that's no change. They're
Yep, no
currently
change.
permitted in the BNR and
Thank you.
BG, so that's identical.
Any questions or discussion there? Okay. So now to the institutional and community services. So we could have a lot of fun with this one too. So we just want to kind of go down, list art, trade, business, dance, music, or similar school. They're permitted in the Cs and in the employment campus. Did not feel those were appropriate for the I-1 and I-2. But kind of going back to, I believe in the industrial park, we do allow some of that limit on a limited basis. If you're in the industrial park, not just as an industrial piece of property.
Or as an accessory use.
Yes.
And again, that's no change. Those uses, the first 5 are generally, they're in different categories in the old code, but generally permitted in the BNR and BG. So that's no change from our trade, community meeting, community recreational daycare, until you get to hospital.
I know we're not going to residential now, but is daycare center allowed in residential?
It is currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is.
And then hospital, that's a tricky one. And currently, our current hospital is in R20,000.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's actually in the county, not the city. There is no move to move them to C3. We have been talking with the hospital about what would work for their situation. And I think one of the things we were discussing was maybe a hospital overlay zone in the C3 for them. I'm sorry, in the R20 for them. So I think the hospital, it's much different than what we have anywhere else for the zoning, and maybe not to rock their boat too much, but they don't want to have to keep there's a lot of conditional use issues and things like that. So we need to have continued discussions with them to kind of make sure that we're.
Why don't you just change them to C3?
Well, we
Well.
don't.
I'm probably missing something, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm saying the same thing. Why not just rezone it?
Well, they're not under the master plan, and that kind of got a little. We could do that.
There's a lot of other types of
Yeah.
uses.
They're in a designated residence.
Yeah, they're in the municipal growth area for Westminster, so it got a little complicated because of that.
And they have other uses
yeah.
that we don't traditionally allow in the C3. I'm trying to remember, the nursing home, oh no, we are allowing that.
Dove House.
The Dove House. What else? What else do
What about their new project?
Yeah, the nursing home.
Yeah.
That's gonna be assisted
But the
living.
nursing home would
That's
be
gonna
Yeah,
allowed.
that would be
Wow.
permitted, but there
Yeah.
was some other,
During our discussions, there was
they didn't fit neatly into the C3 when we
Yeah.
looked at them.
Yeah, but, I mean, I don't know, this just doesn't feel right. Like, we should call a spade and kind of do what's right, not just conform to what it is right now. I mean, it just doesn't make sense for them to be in that area, right? I mean,
Well,
As
there's a lot of
R20.
residential around it, they own a lot of residential property. And I don't
One
wanna speak
thing,
to the
if you-
research, but what was some of the research?
If you
Yeah.
do rezone it to C3,
right,
if the hospital ever does close, and hospitals have been known to close, that
right.
opens that property up to any C3 business use on that property.
Including the houses around it, because the whole thing is kind of self-contained, not
Mhm.
self-contained, but dependent. There's different uses dependent on the hospital that are more residential in nature, as I recall.
So we do,
It's a
that,
while back.
yeah, it was, but,
I mean, it goes all the way down to the senior
You'd
center.
have
Is
to
that
get
senior
different
center also
approaches.
R20?
I think the senior
All-
center's in the city, isn't it?
Oh, is that a dividing line right there?
I
Oh.
think the senior center's in.
I don't know for sure, it's
On Stone
close.
Street.
It
It's
might
right
be-
there.
I think,
Mhm.
I
It's
think it is,
half and half.
actually.
Timber
Something's
Ridge is
close.
right there, and that's in the
Mhm.
city.
It's real close.
I guess maybe take a different approach to this. Since these areas that were in what we call the gray zone around municipalities, which was in the growth areas, weren't addressed in the master plan when that was done in 2014. And they are, I think, going to have to be discussed at least in the future here. So what I think this will do, though, this will put the hospital in the C3. So if that discussion does lead to putting the hospital in the C3, this code will be ready to accept it. That maybe provides a little more comfort, because right now, they are not being addressed in this current master plan kind of proposal for rezonings, but they will be at a later phase, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, Linda Mary. They could be.
yes, correct.
And so this will provide the ability for that, when that happens, and if the recommendation is a C3, and maybe through discussions, that's where we get to, the code will be ready to accept them.
Yeah.
Is that maybe a little better?
Yeah, well, it'll help. It's preparing, us for the master plan,
For that discussion,
for
I
that
think.
part of it.
Yes.
For that discussion with them. I think that's, at this point in time, maybe that's the best we can recommend or suggest doing at this point in time with the code, is kind of preparing for that process to happen.
Because there are no land use designations associated
Correct.
with those municipal growth areas, so.
Right.
It makes it,
Yes.
it makes it more complicated. We have to deal with those issues individually, right?
And I want to speak for the hospital, but in some of our preliminary conversations, I think they would be interested in not having to do conditional use approvals.
Sure.
For things moving forward, so. And they have seen the C3 district, and we haven't received comment from them regarding it, so.
Have not.
No, we have not.
And all the development that's happening around the hospital, like Commissioner Wance mentioned, the assisted living project, that's all appropriate and zoned appropriate and all that
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah, they had to get their
Yeah.
approvals,
Yeah,
but yes,
okay.
they're moving forward.
For the facility that's,
Yeah.
they actually have to go to the board, they're going to the Board of Zoning Appeal, or they haven't filed yet.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah.
But Planning Commission saw it
Yeah.
and was okay with it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So they
So I
are
thought-
working through the process.
okay.
I have a question on there where it says trade school, professional training center is part of industrial park. What do you mean as part of industrial park? Just because it's in the, in I-1,
Yeah.
I-2?
Yep, so the business park is in the commercial districts and the industrial park is in the industrial districts, and it's kind of like a flip of each other, so where one allows more commercial retail type uses in the business park, this it has some of those supportive uses, but it's more industrial in nature.
Well-
And it has
So,
to be approved as such. It can't
Yeah.
you can't just say you're an industrial park. The planning commission would have to approve you as an industrial, which is, they're on in the text.
Okay, so then the trade school is allowed anywhere then?
Yes,
Okay.
mm-hmm, correct.
Because that's at the beginning,
Right.
right? Our
Yeah.
trade,
That's
whatever.
right, it's not
Yeah.
anywhere up
Right.
there, and then it could also be allowed, as the two that
Yeah.
wasn't allowed up there is allowed down here.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think in the industrial park, there's those percentages, so there's only a certain amount that you can put in them, so that's why they're kind of stuck here.
Okay.
So it's clear then to folks, if you're gonna put it in industrial, there are those conditions that go along with the industrial park, that you have to first put industrial park, and then there are conditions with size and the number.
Okay.
And now for the not so pleasant uses at times. The industrial, so then next is the manufacturing and production. So again, going back to the original, I guess, purpose and intent, between commercial and the industrial districts, this kind of, we had to keep going back to that, going back to the same tenets, raw material versus assemblage of something, how noxious or harmful is a particular fume or byproduct or whatever. So that's how we kind of teased out what was prohibited, what was permitted, and what was conditional.
And several uses that used to be conditional in the I-2, we had discussions about, there really wasn't any point in making them conditional, so they became permitted in the heavy industrial district, and that was the concrete mixing plant, blast furnace boiler works, and concrete and ceramics products manufacturing. I think in our discussions, correct me if I'm wrong, but we found that those are perfectly appropriate, and there just wasn't any point to the conditional use approval in the heavy industrial. So those became a little less restrictive just in that one district.
What's the difference between your brewery and your small scale?
The small scale is the 22,500 barrels or less, and we defined that earlier.
Okay.
That's what's commonly called a microbrewery, but we stayed away from that term.
Okay.
And that's consistent with
The
what state law.
Correct. Did you want to go through these use by use, or?
Well, Mary pointed out some of the changes where you made it less restrictive. Are there anything other than those that changed in here?
Just the brewery and small scale brewery.
Because they're new, right?
Because they're new. Well, the small scale brewery is new. A brewery used to be allowed, or is allowed currently
Standard size.
in the ag.
I thought a barrel was standard size.
Well, now, industrial.
Oh, I'm sorry, just
Yeah.
heavy industrial. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of wineries, sorry. Yes, just the industrial, heavy industrial. So this is less restrictive in the I-1 because it's making it permitted, and then this whole new use here. And several pages later, you'll see the accessory uses. That's probably a bigger discussion than just this use table, what it's allowing with
Now,
it.
that's by the barrel, you said, right? 22,000?
Yes, 500.
Is that a 30-gallon or 50-gallon barrel?
Don't know, the barrel's determined by state law, so whatever the state determines as the, whatever a barrel is.
Tom, do you know that?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I did, I don't now. Like, it's
Yeah.
one of those facts I don't
Yeah.
keep here, because I can look it up,
Yep, we can bring that back
right?
to you.
I mean, there is a standard for a barrel.
I understand that, Commissioner, and it is different, I think, for the brewery industry than it is for others.
For distillery, I think there's you're
Well,
right.
distillery is gallons. That's 100,000 gallons or less for a small scale distillery.
Is that produced product or raw product?
I believe it's produced.
It's
Which
state
ones?
law,
The
so
gallons?
whatever the
State-
state,
okay.
whatever the
State law
state
is.
says it is.
Yeah, wow.
Man.
We did your homework on that stuff.
Produced, yeah.
Opening one? No.
Wealth of knowledge over
Yeah.
there. Got them all stumped. Yeah, you have questions?
Yeah.
All
All
governed by
right,
state.
we'll look into those, but we did follow the state. We didn't want to be contrary to them, so.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing, we moved from regular distillery to small-scale distillery and following again whatever the state metrics are for that.
And you see the right-hand column, additional regulations. Anytime you see 158.040, it refers back to that section that talks about how you have to be at least 200 feet from a residential district. And in most of these cases, it's 3 times that, so it's 600 or in some cases 800. Those are current regulations, and we did not change those. So that's what, 002 refers to the fact that it's defined, and 040 refers to what the distance requirement is from residential areas.
We're gonna add any other, I'm sorry, any of the other chapters like 155 or others when they, to the additional regulations, like for the assisted livings and things and the number, that you can put in, might be beneficial to add
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Some of those.
Just in the development code, though, you don't mean like in the liquor part of it, or
I think just development
just
related.
development related?
Yeah. Hopefully if someone's going to the extent of getting a liquor-related industry, whatever it may be, they know enough to go to the state for those, they have to get whatever licensing
Mhm.
from the liquor board.
No, but that makes sense, because it's part of our
Mhm.
subdivision, that way you can see what the
Right.
square footage requirements would be for your density.
Yeah, and then for both professional developers who, and folks they work with on a regular basis, they may not need that, they know to look. But for a resident, or somebody, if we start it here and we continue that through the rest of the code, then it'll be easier for residences to see, oh, it's not just zoning, it's also site plan or some other development code they have to adhere to.
You have the indoor processing of medical cannabis just in the I-2, but light manufacturing is allowed in C3, I-1, I-2.
Actually, I made a correction before you came in. The processing of medical cannabis is also permitted in the I-1 currently. So that was a mistake. Or it's the
Alright.
IR currently, so it will be the I-1.
So it's I-1 and I-2 is what we're looking at?
Yes.
Why not the C2 or C3?
Only because we didn't want to change what the Board of Commissioners had just done when we were working on this.
This goes back to our conversation last week too, that for
Right.
medical cannabis, petroleum storage, solar, we didn't re-discuss those issues since they were so recently undertaken by the board and decisions were made. But one thing that, and you weren't here when we started, Commissioner Frazier, but we still have a little more work to do, going back to our old research for medical cannabis, and then when we come back next time, we'll have a more in-depth discussion with regards to that.
Okay.
So you're gonna come back to talk about dispensary and then
Yeah.
also the processing?
Yep,
And the growing.
yes, and the growing.
Okay.
And to also make sure that we don't see anything new so far that's been introduced in the state legislature, but to make sure we're keeping up with that trend as well.
The, apologize, going back to the brewery, small scale brewery, not allowed in I-2. Is there, why? Is it just not the best use of, again, that property for?
That was our
That was our
Brewery?
thought, and that we are allowing large-scale breweries there, just knowing where they are, what's surrounding them.
And
Okay.
that we're allowing them
Yeah,
everywhere else.
everywhere.
Yeah.
We were trying to reserve the heavy industrial.
Okay, I just
for-
want to make sure I understand the rationale.
Mhm.
Okay.
So a business could grow and then go
Yep.
into that zone?
Yes.
Go into the I-2?
Yes.
No, they couldn't.
No, yeah, they could if they had over 22, if they were bottling and doing like a bigger
Yes. Typically, that's a
manufacturing.
whole different operation,
Yeah.
but yeah.
The next Sam Adams.
Wouldn't that be nice? Are there any other questions under this subcategory, and we can move on to trades? Do you want to go through the highlights in each section?
Of trades?
Yeah.
The only difference in bottling is that we combined, it was listed in several different ways, soft drinks, alcoholic beverages, and milk. We combined it into one category. Print shop is currently a permitted use in the BG. We continued to allow it in the C3, but made it conditional in the C2. We did not identify any current print shops that are going to be in C2, so we do not believe we're creating any non-conforming uses.
And print
And
shops,
C1.
print shops are also kind of like other, industries. Some are small scale, some are very large scale. It's okay just to combine it all. Because some of these large scale print shops, they're massive.
Which is why we made it conditional in the C1 and C2, so that there would be that scrutiny
Okay.
on those properties.
And again, I think going back to what we know too about the location and size of some of the C1 properties, we know you couldn't have a huge, large-scale operation for a print shop there. So a lot of the size of some of these industries will be determined by the size of the property that they're sited on. There's just general limitations.
For welding, sheet metal, machine, it is currently permitted in the BG, and same with the printing shop. We made it conditional in the C2. And again, we don't believe we are creating any non-conforming uses of existing welding, sheet metal, or machine shops. It will be permitted in the C3 and both industrial districts.
Any other questions? Yeah, we'll keep moving on. Transportation and utilities. So airfield, and most of our airfields or airstrips are ag and conservation in the county, so didn't think that using our commercial and employment campus and industrial land for that. However, the airport is conditional on I-1 and permitted in I-2.
Well, how can you have an airport without an airfield?
The airport includes the airfield, so.
These are just traditional airfields.
It's a defined term in the zoning code.
So airport includes an airfield.
A landing
Yes.
strip, yes.
But an airfield does not necessarily
landing
include an
strip.
airport.
It's
I'm
just
assuming.
the
Okay,
field
gotcha.
itself, yeah.
We have lots of
And we have-
airfields.
We
we
have
have
a lot of airfields.
Quite a few in the county.
Right, yeah, we do.
Numerous.
Mhm.
All right.
Just going down like coal yard, I-2, commercial parking, electric generating power plant,
No changes to
Yeah.
any of those.
heliport, solar conversion, again, this was the other one, the solar conversion, again, because it was discussed so recently by the prior board, we did not discuss that issue. So unless there's some things that you would like to see changed with what our current law says, we left it as such.
Towing service is not currently listed.
Regarding solar
Oh, I'm sorry.
energy, just because you brought up, highlighted solar energy and trying to get the most use of solar energy, these conform to what, your intent is? I mean, I don't know enough about, the topic to be honest, but I just want to make sure that we're going along with the intent that we want, the vision of the county, and maximize use of solar energy. I mean, you know more
Right,
about it than
I
I
mean,
do. I mean,
I believe it does
everybody-
fit in there, yeah.
Okay.
I believe it
And I
does.
think the recent discussions and controversy, not only in this county but statewide, have really been on the ag
Right.
lands, more so than in the commercial industrial areas.
Yes.
Okay, okay,
That is a major controversy.
okay.
There was a big article in the Sun
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
this
It was in the
weekend.
Carroll County Times.
Just a
Yeah.
coincidence, the only thing was in the sun, but it's,
Dun-dun-dun.
guys are so-
Um,
Okay, Claire.
Yeah.
You'll get it later, don't Go ahead.
So, yeah, towing service, believe it or not, we had a lot of discussion on towing service, because we didn't have it defined.
Well, it's not
Yeah.
currently listed as a principal use in our code. So
Mhm.
we're listing it for the first time, allowing it in the industrial districts on 5 acres or less, again with the thought that we didn't want to use up large amounts of the industrial district for a towing service. You'll see when we get to accessory uses, it's permitted as an accessory use in
To
several.
auto service.
To auto service.
I was gonna ask, don't we
Yeah.
have
Yes.
towing services that are part of a gas station or
Yes,
something
and
of
we're
that
gonna
sort?
continue that, that's
right,
in the
okay.
next section on accessory uses. So this is if you're just strictly a towing service, that's your principal use.
Do we add impound lot to towing service? Or is that just, would we consider that accessory to a towing?
I think that's the same use.
I think it is too.
Yeah.
Yes. I
That's what we
Okay.
talked about.
All right.
Would you do?
Mhm.
Towing in.
Yeah, okay. Truck or motor freight terminal, again.
change.
No changes, utility
No
equipment.
change.
All conditional. So now moving on to page 46. Utility equipment, all others, that kind of rounds out the final of the transportation utilities, subcategory. So the next is warehouse storage and distribution. Again, petroleum product storage above ground. That was, again, recently discussed within the last few
2
years
years, yeah.
by the former board. We did not make any changes or recommendations to that and left that as such.
And we do need to be clear for anyone that asks, this does not impact gas stations and their ability to have underground tanks. This is just as a principal use.
When you say, just a question, but when you say that, the prior board discussed this, and I wanted, do you say it's just because the prior board just discussed it a year or two ago? Or are you also agreeing with what the prior board
No, because it was
came
just
out?
discussed a year or two ago.
Had
And
nothing
this
to
was
do whether
prepared
you
while
thought
the
it was
prior
right or
board
wrong?
was.
It's a good question.
That we're not answering.
Setting you up on that one.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I could.
Thank
I mean, those code changes were vetted through the Plan Commission, and most of them were generated by staff, vetted through the Plan Commission, and then extensively vetted through the county commissioners in a lot of cases. So, I mean, I don't think we felt like, at this point in time, we saw changes needed for them. I don't want to speak for everybody here, but, we went through pretty extensive
Right.
processes for those changes within, say, the last 5 years, I would say.
Well, again, going
So,
back to solar
my
conversion, the
decision.
EAC
Yes.
had recommendations, so again,
Yes.
it was very
Right.
well
Right.
Yeah.
research vetted and
So.
discussed.
Certainly, if you feel, in reviewing any of them, that there needs to be another look, we certainly could, but we did not feel that was necessary at that time.
Okay.
Is that total, 2,000 gallons?
Mhm.
No, it's not total. It's over 2,000 gallons.
Well,
So you could have 50,000 gallon tanks. If it's under 2,000 gallons,
Or greater, huh?
Or greater.
On the contractor's equipment storage facility and yard, that is currently a pass-through use from the ag zone, and I think we discussed non-conforming uses last time. We've identified 4 of those that were approved in the BG and 2 in the IG that would become non-conforming. But again, this was part of our highest and best use of commercial and industrial.
The self-storage facility on 26 in Emerald Lane by Athens Gym, is that C1 or is that C2?
Yeah, actually, isn't it
I thought it was C1, but I'm
Talking about
not.
across from Liberty Exchange?
Yes.
That's I.
That's I.
IR. That's,
Oh, is
Part
it?
of
best
it
we know,
is-
that's currently non-conforming
Mhm.
because it's not allowed in the IR.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And there's the underground petroleum storage and warehouse or distribution facility. And that's conditional in the C2, but permitted in the C3, I1, and I2, and not prohibited in the employment campus or the C1. And again, with the employment campus, it's that campus. We didn't want the warehousing and distribution, unless it's part of the accessory use to whatever facility's there, but not as a primary principal. And again, those aren't appropriate for smaller C1 properties as well.
And that's currently permitted in the BG, so we are being a little bit more restrictive in the for C2 properties that are currently in the BG. Again, seeing it as more of an industrial and C3 use.
So now moving on to waste related, garbage, offal, or dead animal reduction.
Nothing here has
Nothing
changed,
here.
just so you know. The whole waste related is identical to the current code.
Incinerator associated with waste to energy facility. So all of these are stayed the same.
Mhm.
So conditional in the I2, junk or salvage conditional in I2. Oil contaminated soil facility, conditional in I1, permitted in I2. And then the landfill, solid waste transfer facility, conditional in I2. All right, now these are all the uncategorizable miscellaneous uses. I think I made that word up. Carpet and rug cleaning plant, industrial laundry or dry cleaning, permitted in the I1 and I2, but prohibited elsewhere. Commercial kennel, conditional in the C2 and C3.
And that's the current code.
And we see a lot more of those in our ag districts. Conveyor system, conditional in the C1, 2, and 3. And
What do you mean by conveyor system?
Tom, that came from the,
Lehigh.
Lehigh.
Between
Yeah, okay,
Windsor-
that's the only thing that
but-
came to my mind, but.
Right, but there are a lot of other businesses that do use conveyors in some of their
Mhm.
operations. So it would not just be necessarily
Limited.
something, similar to Lehigh.
So basically, you have it,
It could be,
you could have it anywhere except the employment campus.
yes.
But the conveyors that are being used are typically inside facilities and buildings. I mean, it's not,
Typically.
It's
Typically,
not
en-
rented
typically enclosed.
right, but it's not a separate entity, it's,
Well, in Lehigh's
It
case,
is.
it is.
Lehigh is-
It is.
is one-off.
I mean, you could transport material from one property to another, maybe going over top of a road. No, I'm not saying we have it, but you certainly, if you had a road that splits your properties, you could transport, raw materials from one side to the other on conveyors. So I mean, I don't want.
It's like zoning train tracks, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
Well, part of the problem here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, was we wanted to make sure about having them principal permitted and all, or that they were allowed so that there wouldn't be any issues with like setbacks and all too.
And there's another section of the code that actually lays out where they're permitted, so we were pretty
Yes.
much just transferring
So
that.
are they allowed anywhere else besides the commercial and industrial?
The
I mean,
ag.
through ag, I was
Ag.
thinking through ag.
Yes.
they would
And
have to be.
conditional in all of their
Yeah.
districts, except
And that's
residential.
actually where it was more pertinent to Lehigh, because most of the land
Right.
there was the
That's what I
ag.
said.
But we just want to make sure there's no issues with them being allowed.
Okay.
Unless you all feel there's a problem, because again, sometimes we take the approach is if someone wants to do it, if it's not allowed, there could be an issue with them proposing it with the public side of it, not from us, but people objecting to it. So we want to make sure we felt that people could do it in those commercial and industrial zones. They could use conveyors if they wanted to.
And then the next gets at the extractive operation, with the mineral resource overlay designation, again, that pertains to Lehigh, and then permitted in our industrial zones. Indoor growing of medical cannabis permitted in I2, and there was no change with this being an I1, correct? Or
No, that should
there's-
be,
that should
it was
changed.
permitted in
Okay.
all,
Permitted
all
as well.
3 uses were permitted in IR.
But we're gonna talk about this whole
Yes.
cannabis
Yes.
thing later,
Yes.
so we
But
don't have to bring it
that's
up.
just carrying it
Okay.
over from the
Right.
current zoning code. Laboratory, chemical, physical, or biological, not including agriculture, again, permitted in C2 to employment campus, prohibited in C1. Slaughterhouse permitted in I2 as a conditional use, and use off the premise signs, and that's permitted in everywhere but the employment campus.
But there is a whole section,
Mhm.
158, 115, with a lot of restrictions that Jay could probably give you a lot of detail about.
Yes.
A lot of detail.
This is the way it is currently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently, yes.
And then public facilities are allowed everywhere.
Those are county
Yeah.
facilities, so.
What do you mean by public facilities? It's just like the.
County
building?
governmental facilities,
Okay.
yeah.
We do what we want, right?
Yes,
Put it
correct.
anywhere we want.
There's an exception in the zoning code that allows the county to, basically
Yeah.
ignore the underlying zoning if we want to, and.
I'm learning.
Go ahead and do something.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Can we jump back to the indoor growing of cannabis again? I might have missed what was said. Is that code gonna overlay with the dispensing cannabis code? Will they be identical or different?
That's up to you when we bring you more information
Okay.
back. We'll bring back information on all 3 of the
But
aspects
someti-
of the use.
Sometimes I've heard from other counties where the people involved in the industry wanna be able to grow and dispense in the same location.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part, yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of their business model. So in the future, we get to it, I'd like to see it overlap and be identical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think currently it is in those two industrial
Two
zones.
industrial.
Right.
It is that way, Commissioner,
Okay.
with the two industrial zones currently. You can't do outdoor growing anywhere, but indoor growing, dispensing, and processing, I think,
Are
are
all
all within the
in-
two industrial.
Okay.
And I think that was gonna be also one of the points of discussion, more the dispensing being
Mm-hmm.
less limited.
I never thought I'd be talking about cannabis in an open setting.
It's a new world.
There's a lot of things in this job you never thought you'd be talking
No
about.
kidding. No kidding. Wow. Okay.
It's
Now-
after 3, do we wanna continue on to the next section? Okay. Alright,
You got a good 15 minutes, go ahead.
okay.
Okay, the next the next section, 158.083, breaks down regulation of accessory uses, both for commercial and industrial. And the most important thing about both these sections that you almost don't see is accessory uses shall be as follows. And number 1 is the most important thing there. The rest are just additional regulations or things that are pulled out. But the most important thing about an accessory use, and it's defined elsewhere in the code, is that it's customarily accessory and incidental to any principal permitted or authorized conditional use. And what's listed below is what's included, but certainly not limited to. And I think, and that's where it comes to the interpretation by the zoning administrator, appealable to the Board of Appeals. And that's the way the current code reads, that's the way all codes read. So you would never have pages, well, you should not have pages and pages of lists. If it's customarily accessory and secondary and incidental, then it falls within that category.
And that's common language used?
Yes.
Including but not limited to?
Yes.
I mean, it just opens up
It just opens
Yeah.
it up
a
to whatever
completely
it could be.
subjective.
Different business models,
Right.
different accessory uses. Try to list them all,
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah.
But they do have to be
Every
related to
trend
the
that comes up,
principal
yeah.
use. I mean, there's a lot of case law on it, too.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Like
Could
a
be.
car wash with an accessory beauty salon.
Not so much.
Yeah, that's pretty clear, but, you can have now gas stations with car washes and sub shops, like a Subway inside, that's not so that's kind of comes with the business model now when you open up a big Wawa Sheets.
So I'll just go through the A through J, which are the things that are specifically listed in case there is any confusion or that the commissioners in the past have wanted to pull out. There's a few that are the same. Business signs pertaining to on the premises, and there is a typo here that should read 158-114.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
You caught that.
Good
Thanks for
eye.
catching that. And that's just your business sign. That's just stating that you're allowed to have a business sign, and then 114 gives you all the parameters of that. Again, this less than 2,000 gallons of petroleum products was a piece of legislation adopted a few years ago by the board. And then most of these coming down here are new, and they're things that we felt needed to be pulled out. Well, let me go through them and let you know why. Drive-through service when accessory to a principal permitted or conditional use in the C2 or C3 district, and that's to point out that you wouldn't want to see it in the C1 district. And I think we had a brief discussion on that a few meetings ago, but that's the purpose of pulling that out, is to specify C2 and
Does that
C3.
include liquor stores? We don't have any drive-through liquor stores in
we
Carroll
do.
County.
Used
Are we even
to.
allowed by state law to do that?
Used to be one down in Taylorsville, but they're no longer.
When I was a kid, there was one on the corner at 26 and 32, a drive-through.
Is that?
Is that
There's
it?
also one in Taylor, yeah, there was one across from the old Exxon. Oh,
Yeah.
still
Because I remember
Exxon.
when my parents would go visit
Yes.
my grandfather, he'd swing through that liquor store, and I was just amazed they'd open the trunk and throw beer in it.
Yeah. The sub shop that was in that same building was pretty good too.
We're dating ourselves.
Is it allowed? Drive-through liquor store? Legally? I don't know, I'm just,
I don't see why it wouldn't be allowed.
There certainly are in other counties. I know
they're
there
not
are,
in here.
but they may not be allowed here. I mean, that would be liquor law.
Yeah, they'd be a liquor,
Yeah.
but if they're permitting it, then zoning-wise, we're not stopping it.
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
Same with the car wash, if it's in the C2 or C3 district, that can be accessory to a principal permitted use, typically a gas station. Outdoor storage of vehicles when accessory to a self-service storage facility. That's something, I believe that's in the current code for mini storage, but we pulled it out and put it here in accessory use so that it was clear. Equipment storage when accessory to general office or retail, but we did want to say that in the C1 district, when we drove around the county, we did see that the C1 district does have a lot of equipment storage outside. We believe that should be limited to an area of 1 acre, the storage part of it, especially with the size of most of the C1 properties. Winery, small-scale brewery, small-scale distillery when accessory to a restaurant, and that would mean that the restaurant or tavern would have to be more than half the square footage to make the distillery or brewery or winery accessory to it. So it's, what's a
The
good
principal
example?
use is Johansson's
Yeah,
restaurant.
Johansson's.
The
That's the perfect
subordinate
example.
use
Right.
is
So we're
their
saying, yes.
brewery.
And then if you do have a small-scale brewery, distillery, or winery, consumption or tasting of alcohol, provided the area used for this purpose does not exceed 49% of the total area of the building used. And I know Jay uses that as a standard for a lot of the uses, but this is spelling it out, that that is the requirement for this particular use. Fertilizer, storage or sales when accessory to a permitted or conditional use. Can somebody remind me what this is
Can you
doing?
go back to H a second? So if we have a successful winery or brewery or whatever, and, I mean, a lot of that, especially with a winery, I can speak to that more so. I mean, if they're growing, they have acres and acres and acres maybe of grapes they're growing, but the building, since we're making it 50% or less, or more, 50% or less, of the buildings used for the principal use, there might not be much of a building for
But
the
this
actual
is just for the commercial
vets.
districts. This is the accessory uses in the commercial districts.
Okay, so ag will be different.
Yeah.
Right, so when we get to ag.
Right.
Yeah.
So that winery's probably not gonna have those acres of vineyard in the commercial district.
I don't
Okay,
think so.
Okay. I just didn't wanna.
I don't think I'd wanna drink the wine if it was.
Well, they could now, there are certain wineries that,
Don't grow their own grapes, certainly.
right,
Well,
they
right.
don't have a
You know.
vineyard
But they're
associated
not
with
gonna be
it.
in, they're not
Correct.
gonna be
Those
here.
are two different things.
They're gonna be in,
Well, but they could have, I mean.
well, they
They
could
could
be in
have a
shop centers. They
tasting,
could be
Yeah.
I mean, I have
Yeah,
seen
there's
that
some of them.
before.
Yeah.
They're,
There's actually
they're
one
in
in,
planned business centers,
Yeah.
and they just,
Yeah, there's actually one down in Albany.
Yeah, oh, you just took it out, yep, that's the only one I know of is in the Olney area.
Well,
From the wine festival.
I would, I
They
just
got
wonder
what they
if,
want.
since
Yeah,
we're
they did.
making,
Olney Vine.
since we're making it relative to the size of the buildings for the principal use, the building for the principal use may not be very large relative to the tasting area. Maybe we need to think about that, I don't know. I don't wanna throw a monkey wrench in here, but I don't wanna make someone illegal from get-go.
Well, we don't have anything like that currently, so I guess any new business coming in would know ahead of time what
Not
they.
only that, but if you have a tasting area that's larger than the distillery or the brewery or whatever, is that more bar or tavern with that distillery in it, or is it the distillery with a tasting room bar type thing? So that's, like I say, it's where it becomes the accessory principal use of the
Right.
property.
It's
And
not-
we have
it's not that
tried
you
to
couldn't do
accommodate
it.
both of those
Yeah.
models,
Yeah.
being
And
G
you
and
could
H.
do a
Right.
big area, but that would be considered, a bar would
bar,
be considered the principal use.
Yeah, it would just be a bar.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanna make,
Yeah.
thanks.
Tom, do you remember why we did fertilizer storage or sale? Why did we pull that out as,
As an
think-
accessory use?
I think we have that situation in the county, if I'm not mistaken.
that's right,
County in Westminster.
yes,
All
that
right,
is why we
so
did
that situation exists.
Feeds.
So we wanted to be sure the zoning administrator does have to approve that
That's correct.
because of that type of situation.
Boom.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Oh,
saying. Mhm.
That's all in the county.
Yeah,
that's right.
that's,
I was
If you wanna
thinking
have fun
city.
someday, figure out what's in the county, what's
It's
in the
in the
city.
city.
of
Right
Westminster.
there.
Ride around and see, and then look at the map, you'll be very surprised.
Yeah.
Drive down
City of
140.
Westminster is one of the
It's-
hardest,
It's
yeah.
just
Yeah.
5 times.
See, I assumed that was in the city.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
County.
Okay,
Chick-fil-A
and
is, right?
J is a current solar energy conversion facility, that is a current accessory use. It's just referring to 153B, which gives additional requirements. So that's everything for the commercial. The industrial starts the same way, saying that it has to be accessory and incidental to any principal permitted or authorized conditional use, and then it lists a number of specific uses. Mobile home or dwelling associated with industrial use is current language. Storage modules subject to the following standards, that's current language, except for number 4 is a new requirement that they not be stacked, and that was at the request of the zoning administrator. Retail sales and service of products manufactured on or distributed from the site. That's sometimes an important component of a light manufacturing operation. We wanted to be clear that that is allowed to be accessory. Here we get to D, towing service. It can be accessory to an automobile service center or vehicle repair shop. Excuse me. Car wash when accessory to a permitted or conditional use. And again, we're just in the industrial right now, so a lot of times this would mean your own trucks that you need to be washed on site. Motor vehicle rental and leasing when accessory to an automobile service center or vehicle repair shop. Again, that's newly specified. And consumption or tasting of alcohol, I won't read the whole thing, but G, talking about the same issue we were just talking about of the tasting of alcohol for
You go back to
breweries.
car wash for a second.
Mhm.
If you, accessories permit use, but do you have to have a certain facility to wash it? I mean, depends on what you're washing off, salt or whatever, can it just go into the street? You have to have some way
No.
to take care of
Most
that?
of them have, nowadays, they have to be
But is that,
recycled.
but, okay, is that spelled out when they come, they ask, okay.
Yeah, I can't think of any car wash or even industrial wash system used by any trucking business or anything, that they don't recycle the water and collect
Okay.
what gets washed off.
But that is a choice. Now, I don't want you to think that Clay, correct me, I don't think there's any code requirement for
No,
that
there's-
currently.
We don't have a code
We don't.
requirement.
But-
There might be other agencies, but we don't.
But is there a code requirement for?
Like MDE or somebody?
Right, you know, if they're bringing trucks in and they're full of, let's say, road salt, since we're having, and they
Right.
just wash it off in there, it just goes into the.
But that
No.
would be a car wash. I mean, I see what you're saying, because you could have a power washer.
Yes.
A power hose, that's not really a car wash. I think what they're telling us,
All right, that's not what this is
a
about.
building,
Okay.
a built use.
Okay.
Right, but you could still
Okay.
do what
Yeah.
you're talking about, Commissioner. I
Yeah, you
think
could still do that.
our code, through our water rates and other codes, we would make sure that it's done environmentally sound, if that's, what you're
Right.
concerned about, yes. But that would be through other codes that we would look at that, and again, it would be a choice probably for the operators as to how they want to do that. We would just ensure that they would not be creating contaminants that would enter the waters or either
Okay.
groundwaters or surface waters, yes.
Okay, Jay, again, the solar energy conversion facility is in the existing code and references 158, 153 for additional regulations. So, number 2 is regarding non-industrial accessory uses in the industrial districts, and this is currently in the code. Limits them to 3,000 square feet and not exceeding 15% of the lot or parcel. The new language in here is that it says a single non-industrial accessory use. The current code would allow you to do as many of them as you want. This is a single non-industrial accessory use. And the thing to remember here too is this is not, for the industrial parks, there's different regulations. This is just for an industrial use, can only have one single non-industrial accessory use. And those are all laid out, that's current code language on the next page, on page 49.
So you're saying in an industrial park, you can only have one?
No, in
No,
the
the
industrial
park's
park,
different.
when we get to it, there's a little bit, it's a little bit different. How
This
many?
would be a standalone lot or parcel you develop
Yes.
for a particular use, industrial use. You could have one of these uses on that property.
Like Ottenberg's down in Eldersburg, they're manufactured, but if they had
A little bit.
eating room
Yeah,
or,
bakery.
yeah, a bakery.
Like a retail bakery.
Yes.
Or I could think another good example would be like Hans Meats, where that's industrial, but then they have the little coffee
Yep.
shop, sandwich shop as part of it, would be like another, they could have that one, but then they couldn't have other come off of that.
And the reason for adding that single was because there was the thought that some of the industrial uses are, there's just too many accessory retail and non-industrial uses going on. Not the highest and best use.
Do you want to stop there since you're also
Yeah.
commissioner?
Yeah, I think probably best that we do stop, but you had questions before we stop on getting, I guess, a pulse check on where we are. Is that what the kind of conversation was? And how many more sessions you think?
Yes, yeah, just to kind of end up, so we can schedule with your calendars to make sure that we can keep this ball rolling in the coming weeks.
We have next week scheduled,
We have
so-
next week already scheduled, but then I'm thinking like now, the 7th? No.
Whatever's
Next week, the
next after.
29th, so then like the 5th then, I think, is the following Tuesday. Mary, but how much more do you think we have left of just the
Actually,
the preliminary?
I would think we could get through this in the next session, but we do have to talk about the medical cannabis again, and that's probably a big discussion to bring back. Was there anything else we were bringing back that was raised?
So I'm gonna bring maps and statistics for the commercials, the industrials, and the employment campus. Where they are, how many acres, some statistics on average acreage size, things like that we'll bring back. And then medical cannabis is the other big discussion point that we still have to facilitate. And then we're ending on page 49, so we're gonna begin with the bulk requirements.
And then a lot of what's after that is just existing language and a little bit of cleanup. There's really not a lot after
So
that.
7 pages left.
Except for talking about the industrial park and the business park are
Mhm.
kind of a big deal because they have percentages that you're gonna wanna discuss.
Sounds like we could do it in one session, 2 hours. I mean,
So
let's-
then, after the language is complete, I think the other outstanding items then would be how to proceed forward with public outreach meetings prior to a public hearing. I think it would be good to get feedback prior to the public hearing, so that way maybe any larger issues that were unforeseen by us could be addressed and researched if it needed to be prior to coming onto the public hearing. You're always gonna have those at a public hearing situation who say they've just heard about it or something new, or bring up some type of new idea. But by having some public outreach meetings and maybe for some two-way dialogue, would be helpful. And then talking about, rolling this out to the public, we have a game plan for that. Sending out letters to the affected property owners, with maps, we already have all that prepared. So kind of talking about preparing a timing moving forward. So perhaps if we do have that February 5th meeting scheduled, it could be dedicated to the
Sort of
wrap up of
process,
this, and then
yeah.
the process moving forward with a timeline.
Yeah, so why don't we just schedule the next 2 meetings?
Well, next one we already have scheduled.
We already have that.
So,
We'll just,
Do the
I don't know.
February 5th.
yeah,
We'll-
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll
I would
put
hold
Denise
it,
and-
at least block it.
Yeah.
right now it's on hold on my
Mhm.
calendar.
Yeah,
Okay.
same.
I'd leave it that way, and then if we need it, fine. If we don't,
Exactly.
fine her.
I wouldn't hold our breath on that. We're gonna need a bit.
I used to think the people in the budget office were nerds. You guys got them beat with this stuff.
Thanks. That's a point of pride. We'll own that.
I know you guys pride yourself on your
Yeah.
It's taken me
nerdiness.
30 years to get to this point, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Where's the badge?
You live and breathe this stuff, right?
But you guys do a wonderful
Yeah.
job.
Thank
I
you.
am learning a lot about this, because I walked in this completely ignorant, and I had constituents talking to me about this subject, and I was just, blank on it. So now I feel I'm equipped better to talk to people about it, so thank you.
You're welcome. It's our
Thank you.
pleasure. It's what we do.
Any other further discussion? Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second?
Oh,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye, no arguing.